Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's Real Estate Weekly Lesson. I am Greg, and if you are not familiar with who I am, I've been a full-time real estate investor now for over 10 years. I've done almost 500 completed properties that have actually closed, and my goal on this is to share with you lessons that I've learned, right? Whether it's an actual deal that I'm talking about, an interview that I did with someone who's successful, or the typical, REI Weekly Lesson like we're doing today. So if you get value from this, do me a favor. If you're watching, if you can like the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you're listening, if you could share this with somebody else who you think would get value from it, it would mean a lot to me. And that's how we continue to grow the program. So today I'm actually going to talk about when does it make sense to sell rental properties, right? Because a lot of people say, oh, never sell, never sell. If you have rentals, never, 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 never sell. And I will say most of the time I would agree with that. But there are going to be situations when you start buying a lot of rentals where it's going to make sense to sell some of them. So first of all, let's say you have a property and it's not a good situation, whether the location's bad or the interior is bad. Like if the property is something you're not really, I wouldn't say proud of renting, but something you're not exciting about renting out, that may be a time to sell. So let's say, for example, you have a house or a condo or a multifamily and it's just in a rough neighborhood and you really don't like dealing in that neighborhood, or it's in really rough shape and you might not want to put the kind of work in to fix it up and you don't really want to see that through. That's usually a time to sell. Another situation when you want to sell rentals is, if you squeezed all the juice out of it. So obviously everyone talks about, oh, you buy rentals, you pay them down, you pay them off, you ride into the sunset. And if you never sell, you're going to have all this equity and blah, blah, blah. And yeah, that is true. But there are times where you buy a property at a really good price. You add a lot of value to it off the bat because you bought it at a discount and it allowed you to rehab it. And you rent the property out for full market value for 5 years. And then next thing you know, you look at the property and you're like, wow, like I have all this equity in this property. It's made a lot of cash flow. But going forward, like, is it really going to continue to go this way? And the answer is most likely not. It's probably going to, slightly go up in value every year. But ultimately, if you put a lot of work in year one, by year 5 and 6, some of those things that you did to the property are going to start to deteriorate. And then you're going to have to put more money into it. And then what you got to do is you got to look at your return on the equity, right? So for example, there's a property that I'm selling now, and I'm not going to get into the details because it hasn't closed, but I looked at the equity in the property and I said, okay, if I have to put another 40 grand into this thing because it's really screwed up, my return on the equity is terrible, right? I'm going to have, $40,000, $50,000 of cash into this thing additionally to what I paid for it. And it's only going to make $400 or $500 a month after expenses. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. I'm better off selling that property, taking the equity right now, not having to rehab it. And then, yeah, I might have to pay taxes on that if I don't 1031. And ultimately, it is what it is. That's baseball, as they say. And I could take that money and I can put it into another investment. I can put it into, another rental property. Maybe I can move that equity somewhere else that's producing a higher yield. So the point here is if you have a lot of equity that's trapped into your rental and that equity is not getting a good return. So what I mean by that is like, what's the actual net income the property's producing after expenses? And if you take that number and then you divide it into the amount of this like estimated equity you have, if the return on equity is like 2 or 3%, you're not making a good return on the equity. Maybe on your cash you are. If you have minimal in the deal, of course, you're making a good cash on cash return. But if you look at the overall equity that you have, which is part of your wealth building plan, if you're getting a 2% on your rental because you have 400K in equity and it's making 10 grand a year, well, that would be a 4%. That's still not good. You're better off selling that property, hopefully 1031ing, or even if you don't 1031, paying the tax and then putting that money into a higher yield investment. Maybe it's another rental. Maybe you rinse and repeat. Maybe it's a stock portfolio. Maybe it's crypto. I don't know what that is, but if it's a better return than 4%, a lot of the times it makes sense to sell that rental property because you got to also realize in rentals, not only do you have to, keep up with the property and manage it, there's things that can go wrong. Things can break. Things can catch on fire. There's drama. You're dealing with tenants. There's a lot of red tape that goes into rentals. It's very active, quote unquote, passive investment, if you know what I'm saying. It's really not passive at all. It's completely active. So you got to understand that and you got to factor in like the peace of mind. Like, hey, I can have this rental and it's making a little bit of money. But if I really weigh that against the peace of mind, the drama, the tenants, is it really worth it? And sometimes if you have a lot of equity, it's better off you're just selling it. So that's the second situation. And the third situation is if you're selling rentals as part of a portfolio to optimize your portfolio, like, look, for example, let's say you have 20 houses, right? Or 20 condos or 20 units, whatever. And let's say that 3 of them are just nightmares, right? Nightmares to manage, nightmares, location, whatever the case is, they're just not a good time. If you take the 3 properties and you eliminate them from your life, and then you have 17 left, and those 17 properties are all performing, it makes sense to sell those 3, because if those 3 properties are causing you 80% of your headaches, even if you have to pay taxes, it makes more sense to just sell those rentals that are never a good time. You don't sell them all. That doesn't make a lot of sense usually. But if you're selling a little piece of your portfolio to get peace of mind and just a better overall management system, it makes a lot of sense. And obviously, yeah, you're going to pay taxes. Yeah, you're going to recapture your depreciation. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. It is what it is. That's part of the game. One more reason I would give you on maybe it makes sense to sell rentals is if your local jurisdiction is not in favor. And then, like, obviously I invest in very like anti-landlord friendly places. And it's gotten bad, but it's not at the point where I want to sell everything. But that's another factor. Let's say that you have 20 properties and 10 of the properties are in landlord friendly places. And let's say the other 10 are in non-landlord friendly places, tenant friendly places. If you're like, hey, I don't like being a landlord in a tenant friendly place, it makes sense to sell the ones that are in there, right? Because most likely those ones also have gone up in value more than the other ones, right? So if you just don't like the climate of being a landlord in your local jurisdiction and you don't like how the red tape and you can't evict people and you have no rights as a landlord, all that stuff, it makes sense to sell. So those are some reasons you want to sell rentals, right? I would say generally speaking, you probably don't want to do it, but if you have any of the circumstances that I covered in this video, it might make sense to sell your rentals. So hopefully you got value from this. If you are in the Hudson Valley or you're in Delaware or you're in the Seattle area and you have a house you want to wholesale to me, send me an email, greg@velocityhousebuyers.com, or an Instagram direct message at grego_37. And I will see you on the next REI Weekly Lesson. Take care.